New Year's Eve. And what we're going to do tonight is spend an hour with a friend of ours of many years' duration. He is, without question, the world's foremost authority and scholar on Nostradamus, his writings, his life, the works. In fact, he may know more about Nostradamus than anyone ever has since he died. And only those few around him who really knew him would have known more. But in many ways, I think John extrapolates upon that and takes it much further because of the amount of study and research he's done. John Hogue is who we're talking about, and he is a world-famous, I don't want to call him a predictor. He forecasts, and he's, unfortunately, all too often right, especially when it comes to the presidential elections. John, how many have you hit?
Well, I've been doing it since 1968. I make a prediction based on the popular vote. I often also get the popular vote correct. And in that, I am now 12 attempts, and I'm 12-0.
Well, 12-0 means you haven't missed. Now, there are a lot of folks out there wishing you would miss, certainly in the last two, but maybe we can talk about the next one in this hour. But is that included in your forecasting?
Yes, this is
the Hillary and Jeb show?
The 2016 corporate American Idol show. And I mean running on political idol.
Exactly.
Like hanging in a constant stagnation. There's a theme that in predictions for 10 predictions for 2015, which is out now at Amazon, and the next larger book that I'm going to put out at the end of next month called Predictions 2015. I come back to the subject of the 2016 election. Because
we have to go through 2 years of agony with this crap, of course.
Well, it's part of it's an act 3 of a larger opera, political opera that started in 2010 when I started writing about the corporate kleptocratic takeover that is threatening to basically hijack the Constitution and our government from.
Oh, yeah. We are a corporatocracy. They've taken it. It's done.
Well, the final touches are in the 2016 election, where the choices for who we will pick for the next president are not ours, but theirs. And so you have two corporately accepted, oligarchic accepted prime candidates.
Right.
You have Jeb Bush on the right. You have Hillary Clinton on the left, but they're basically storefronts for a deeper problem. And when I look into the future, the thing that comes back and the feedback about what has to be done is it's really a time for Americans to seriously abandon the two-party system.
Seriously, absolutely,
and not vote for anyone who subscribes to it, because the other important thing is, you don't need a Nostradamus, modern or ancient, to tell you this, that money has completely corrupted the system. And so, you got to take money out of it. That means that all elections need to be publicly funded by the taxpayer. And no special interest.
And there should be a very limited campaign season, like 6 weeks.
That's
lots
right.
Of rules and regulations, term limits, and so on and so forth.
Just like what they do in Europe, they don't spend 2 years. In the 8-year period now that we have a potential 2-term president, there's only 4 years that anything almost gets done, because the other 4 years are caught up in election.
Precisely.
And prep for election. So what's kind of ironic about these 2 books on 2015 is I'm already having to write a lot of what I would have written about a year from now, because the focus is already being pushed this way.
Oh, Google! 3 weeks ago, Google came out and announced for Hillary. All right? When I saw that, I said, geez, they're not even going to wait for the new year. They started early, and they did. And the first poll is to keep it, quote, interesting for the sheep. Hillary is way out in front of Jebby, 60, I don't know, 60-40, something like that. 58-42, I don't know. It's ridiculous. But
well, Jeff, here's the other possibility. Because it's going to look so set up that it could have a significant blowback. And I do foresee that happening because, fortunately for us, since 2010, we have been under, in astrology, a unique set of negative aspects, which basically, in layman's terms, it's called the Uranus-Pluto squares. And Uranus is, in the astrology language, is the rebeller. But when it's squared Pluto in Capricorn, which is the establishment, you have a suppressive establishment status quo that is butting heads with a street-driven mass revolution of crowds that are leaderless. And so it goes nowhere. But there's only one last period of time. Like right now, we are going to start again the final of these many squares, and it ends in early May next year. And when that happens, there's going to be a period in the summer where it's literally, that's why I call this coming year the year of last chances, because there's a transit of Scorpio by Saturn, which has one last little nudge of 3 months. It goes out now, and it comes back in the summer, ends in September. And in that period of time, there's an opportunity for those things that are ruled under that sign to be dealt with. They happen to be corporations, money, financial markets, and the need for them to be reformed, about inheritances. What happens every 28 to 29 years that Saturn passes through all the signs of the zodiac back to Scorpio, is you can follow its progress through the history of America, as those periods have always been for 3 years when the transit's happening, that the country has a debate about where it's been, where it's going, and Americans do what up until recently we were really good at, and that is redefining ourselves, redefining our dream, and then moving forward in the next 28, 29 years. And the times when we didn't, I'll give you an example. One of the Saturn returns happened towards the end of the Civil War, around that time, and we redefined ourselves, and we went out west, and then 28, 29 years later, we ended up a world power of great influence economically and politically in the world.
Okay.
Now, in the Saturn terms, that means we as a collective thought it out good and advanced. But the same Saturn return that came around the early 1920s, right after World War I, America didn't look at its structural issues of its economy, its wealth, its politics. And so we had 28 years of trouble as karmic consequence, because Saturn rules karma, action, reaction, bad action, bad, what goes around comes around.
Yeah, the rings of Saturn, eh?
And what happened, literally, the rings of Saturn turned us on our ear, and because we didn't deal with get our house in order about our economy and our banking system, in very similar ways that the banking system is now, we had the Great Depression. Then we were followed, the Great Depression begat an unstable society in the world, which brought us the Second World War, the rise of fascism, totalitarian regimes, and that is all kind of Saturn payback for not. And then we tried to stay out of the war, but we were dragged in. We had to clean up the mess, and lost a lot of men and women doing it. And that is the consequence of not taking stock of where we were going in the Saturn return to Scorpio in the early 1920s. Now, there would be people who would argue that the Saturn return that took place towards the end of Reagan's first term into his second term was another opportunity to look farther afield, and one would argue that many of the things that were launched in the Reagan era we're reaping the consequences of. Certainly wasn't just him. Certainly the Clinton administration did a lot of things. That's why it's kind of eerie to have the Clintons come back, because what Reagan started as a mess, the Clintons kind of fulfilled by breaking down laws that separated the financial markets from banks. And
they dissolved them.
Yeah, and basically got us back to the place we were at when we had the last economic depression. Now,
that's very interesting analysis.
In the same amazing singularity or similarity, we have a more wealth in less hands in the country than we haven't seen since 1929.
I'd say.
The stock market crash of 1929.
Mm-hmm.
So we have the same lack of firewalls legally stopping corruption between these systems of banking and finance and speculation. We're repeating ourselves. Only it's much more significant danger this time around. It led to the Great Depression and World War II. This time it leads to what I call an even greater depression, with some interesting twists.
Worldwide, Western world, Europe, America?
It'll be the thing. There's some good news in all this bad news, is that unlike the last depression, it was a much more simple, monotheistic, one-dimensional world economy. And what we're living in now is actually a multiverse of economies. We're actually going to see different reserve currencies that are, there's not going to be one global
basket full of them. I agree.
You have the BRICS. You have literally going to be 2 or 3 different financial realities. And also, even beyond that, there are now new emergent, what I call it the decentralization revolution that's taking place in all walks of life. And to give you a simple analogy of what it is where technology is used by citizens to take their money and their influence out of central banks, out of central government, and actually make it locally more powerful than it is federally.
Well, the race is on to keep them dumbed down so they don't understand the potential there. I always point to local federal credit unions for openers. People should bring their money out. I ask people, where do you bank? I used to do this for fun. Where do you bank? I hate this government. Well, where do you bank? Bank of America. And it gets to be absurd.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
The other thing I would tell people is do not believe what the mainstream media is saying about pretty much anything. Unless you just want to know what the propaganda of the day is.
Yeah.
I mean, there's prophets I studied before the Cold War was over that said that when the Russians gave up and Soviet Union collapsed with a whimper, you would watch in another 10, 15 years America become the new Soviet Union.
Yeah.
With alternative media being the new samizdat. They used to have a thing in Russian called samizdat, which is underground media where people would print banned books and pass it along to their friends, and a whole network of trying to find out what was really going on in the world.
That word is spelled SAMSIDAT.
Yes. Well, the Internet is our new samizdat. And also, it's spreading the idea into the blockchains of new economics. The cryptocurrencies, you probably in American news think that Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies are dead. The problem is that's not the truth. It's being pushed that way in America because it's considered a real threat to central financial power when people can actually use a numeric security system that eventually is going to make it easy for anyone in the world to have a transaction with anyone else in the world, and borders and banks don't mean zilch. It's just direct transactions with a code trail that shows who it is. So when they lie about people using Bitcoin to launder money, they don't understand it. That's propaganda. You actually have a clearer tracing trail through ones and zeros of where that money was and where it went to be laundered than you do with paper money or the fiat credit money that is the main currency of our times now, which is basically, since 1971, an economic system that's floating currency on nothing.